The Fawcett Expedition. In 1925, British explorer Percy Fawcett set out into the Brazilian Amazon with his 21-year-old son Jack and Jack's best friend Raleigh Rimmel. Fawcett was obsessed with finding what he called the Lost City of Z, an ancient civilization he believed existed deep in the Mato Grosso region. He had been planning this expedition for over a decade and was convinced this would be his greatest discovery. Fawcett was no amateur. He had mapped uncharted territories across South America for the Royal Geographical Society and survived previous jungle expeditions that had killed other men. But this time was different. He was older, at 57, and the route he planned would take them through some of the most hostile territory on the continent. On May 29, 1925, Fawcett sent his final message from Dead Horse Camp, a remote outpost in the jungle. The telegram read simply that they were preparing to enter unexplored country with good health and spirits. After that, only silence. Search parties were launched over the following decades, but no trace of the three men was ever found. Years later, local tribes told stories of three white men who had been captured and killed for violating sacred territory. Others suggested they died from disease or starvation. The truth remains buried somewhere in the Amazon, along with Fawcett's bones. The Cutright Incident. In 1961, anthropologist Paul Cutright led a research expedition into the Venezuelan rainforest to study indigenous tribes. His team included photographer Michael Rockefeller, son of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, along with two local guides and a Dutch missionary named René Wassing. The expedition was traveling by canoe along the Eilanden River when their boat capsized in rough waters about 12 miles from shore. Cutright and Wassing managed to cling to the overturned vessel, but Rockefeller decided to swim for land. The 23-year-old stripped down to his underwear, tied empty fuel cans around his waist for flotation, and began swimming toward the distant shoreline. Wassing watched helplessly as Rockefeller disappeared into the swirling brown water. A massive search operation was launched involving military aircraft, patrol boats, and hundreds of local volunteers. They combed thousands of square miles of jungle and coastline for weeks. Nothing was found except a fuel can that might have been from Rockefeller's improvised flotation device. Local Asmat tribesmen later told conflicting stories. Some said they had seen a white man come ashore, but that he died from exhaustion. Others whispered darker tales of ritual killing and cannibalism. The official cause of death was listed as drowning, but those familiar with the Asmat knew their reputation for headhunting and their belief that taking an enemy's life force made them stronger. The Burke Massacre. In 1978, a team of botanists from the University of California set out to catalog plant species in the Colombian Amazon. The expedition was led by Dr. Richard Burke, a respected researcher who had spent years studying tropical ecosystems. His team included graduate students Maria Santos and David Chen, along with two Colombian guides. Burke's group established a base camp near the Putumayo River and began their systematic survey of the surrounding forest. For 3 weeks, they sent regular radio updates to their university contacts. Their research was going well, and they had discovered several potentially new species of orchids and bromeliads. On August 15th, their scheduled radio check never came. Rescue teams were dispatched from Bogotá, but it took 4 days to reach the remote research site. What they found was a scene of complete devastation. The camp had been ransacked and burned, equipment was scattered across the jungle floor, and there were clear signs of violence. The bodies of Burke and Chen were found first, both shot multiple times. Santos was discovered 2 days later, deeper in the forest. The Colombian guides had vanished entirely. Local authorities believed the team had stumbled into territory controlled by drug traffickers, who mistook them for government agents or rival cartel members. The area where Burke's expedition was working had become a major cocaine processing region. Paranoid smugglers had apparently decided that any outsiders posed an unacceptable security risk. The murders sent shockwaves through the international scientific community and led to new safety protocols for researchers working in conflict zones. The Harrison Survey. In 1983, geologist Dr. James Harrison received funding to conduct a mineral survey in the Guyanese interior. Gold had been discovered in neighboring regions, and Harrison believed similar deposits might exist in the unexplored highlands near the Brazilian border. His team consisted of 5 specialists: mineralogist Ann Foster, surveyor Carlos Mendez, photographer Tom Williams, and 2 local Amerindian guides. The expedition flew by helicopter to a remote plateau and established a base camp at 3,000 feet elevation. The plan was to spend 6 weeks systematically exploring the region before being picked up at a predetermined location. Harrison's team had satellite phones and GPS equipment, making this one of the most technologically advanced jungle expeditions of its time. For the first 2 weeks, everything proceeded normally. The team reported finding interesting geological formations and took hundreds of core samples. Foster was particularly excited about mineral traces that suggested significant gold deposits in the area. Then the rains came. The wet season arrived 3 weeks earlier than predicted, turning streams into torrents and making helicopter extraction impossible. The team's satellite phone malfunctioned during a lightning strike, cutting off their communication with the outside world. They were trapped on a mountain plateau with rapidly dwindling supplies and no way to call for help. Harrison made the decision to split the team. He would take Mendez and one guide to search for an alternate extraction point, while Foster, Williams, and the second guide remained at base camp to protect the equipment and samples. It was a calculated risk that would prove fatal. The search party never returned. Foster's group waited 5 days before abandoning camp to look for them. They found Harrison's body at the bottom of a 200-foot ravine, his neck broken from the fall. Mendez and the guide had simply vanished. The jungle had claimed them without leaving a trace. Foster, Williams, and their remaining guide struggled through the flooded forest for weeks. Williams developed severe dysentery and could barely walk. Their food ran out, forcing them to survive on palm hearts and whatever small animals they could catch. When rescue helicopters finally located them 6 weeks later, Williams was unconscious and Foster was delirious from fever. The guide had kept them alive using traditional survival skills, but Williams died in the hospital 3 days after evacuation. The Kellerman Disaster. In 1991, wildlife filmmaker David Kellerman assembled a crew to document jaguar behavior in the Peruvian Amazon. The team included cameraman Steve Walsh, sound engineer Lisa Park, biologist Dr. Elena Vasquez, and 3 local porters. Kellerman had produced award-winning documentaries across 6 continents and believed his experience would protect them from the jungle's dangers. The expedition was following jaguar tracks along the Ucayali River when they encountered a group of illegal loggers. The loggers were cutting valuable mahogany trees in protected territory and didn't want witnesses. What started as a tense confrontation quickly turned violent when one of the porters tried to photograph the illegal operation. Gunshots erupted in the forest clearing. Walsh was killed instantly by a rifle blast to the chest. Park and Vasquez ran into the jungle but were hunted down over the next 2 days. Kellerman and the surviving porters managed to reach the river and escape by canoe, but they were pursued for miles by the armed loggers. When authorities finally arrested the logging crew weeks later, they found the bodies of Walsh and Park. Vasquez was never located. The loggers claimed she had been killed by a jaguar, but investigators suspected murder. The case highlighted the growing violence between environmental researchers and criminal enterprises operating in remote jungle areas. When rescue teams discovered the remaining survivors days later, they found evidence of what the jungle can do to even the most prepared expeditions. The cameras were ruined by moisture, the equipment scattered and useless. Kellerman never filmed again, haunted by what he had witnessed in those dark green depths. The Martinez Cave Incident. In 2003, speleologist Carlos Martinez led a team into the limestone caves beneath the Ecuadorian rainforest. His group included geologist Sarah Chen, photographer Mark Stevens, and 2 experienced cave divers from Brazil. They were mapping an underground river system that connected multiple cave networks across the region. The team had been underground for 3 days when heavy rains began flooding the cave system. Water levels rose rapidly, trapping them in a chamber 400 feet below ground. Their diving equipment was in a different section of the cave, now completely submerged. Martinez tried to swim through the flooded passages to retrieve their gear, but the current was too strong. Chen's body was found floating in the main chamber 2 days later. Stevens and one of the Brazilian divers died attempting to dig an escape route through loose rock. The cave ceiling collapsed, crushing them instantly. Martinez and the surviving diver were rescued after 5 days when water levels finally receded, but both suffered severe hypothermia and lung infections from breathing the stagnant air. The Thompson malaria outbreak. In 2008, medical researcher Dr. Rachel Thompson took a team into the Bolivian Amazon to study drug-resistant malaria strains. Her expedition included epidemiologist James Wright, lab technician Nina Petrov, and local guide Antonio Morales. They established a field laboratory near indigenous villages where new malaria variants had been reported. Within days of arriving, the team was exposed to a particularly virulent strain of the disease. Their anti-malarial medications proved ineffective against this new variant. Thompson fell ill first, developing high fevers and seizures. Wright tried to treat her using their limited medical supplies, but her condition deteriorated rapidly. Petroff became delirious and wandered into the forest during her fever. Search parties found her body 3 days later, dehydrated and covered in insect bites. Thompson died at the field station, her research notes scattered around her makeshift bed. Wright and Morales barely survived the trek back to civilization, both requiring months of hospitalization and experimental treatments. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe. Every like gives me more power to create the next video for you.